Hi guys, this is Juno and welcome back to another Summoner's War video. Today we have another guide video. It's been a while, but it is back, and the unit we are going to talk about, as you can see, is Vigor. I thought of doing the Light Martial Cat, which is Yao Ling. Yeah, I thought of doing Yao Ling, but the unit itself is not as popular as Vigor, so instead I decided to go with the Vigor. I don't know, maybe I'll make a guide video for Xiaoling because she is pretty good. I use her all the time. You guys have seen her in my past videos and she is definitely a good unit. But this one is for Vigor. This video might contain some redundant information from my Commune Vigor's Gogo guide, but I hope I can give you some more insight on how to properly rune a Vigor depending on your rune status or your rune quality. Before we go into the video, hope you can like and subscribe to support the channel. Thanks. So in my past video where we talked about how to build, Commune Vigor's Gogo, I laid out why Vigor is so OP in the current meta. I'm going to say current meta because again, we are expecting a balance patch. We are expecting the next 2A to come out, so we don't know their skill sets. We don't know how they're going to change the meta. So who knows, maybe Vigor will be pushed back from the OP tier list. But it is nonetheless still OP. Just to reiterate, he has a heal block, a speed buff, a crit resist buff, a heal, and finally a multi-hit defense break. Well, that sounds right. He has a multi-hit that can land a 3-turn defense break that also does massive damage if it's on the correct build, okay? If you look at his skills, the cooldowns for his skill 2 and 3 are respectively 3 turns each, which means that he can provide multiple speed buffs, heals, crit resist buffs for the team, and defense break to the opponent if he gets a couple of lucky procs. From this, because we really don't use Vigor in PvE content, I know some people here are going to say, I use him in Raid, I use him in Necro, but nonetheless, it is safe to say that Vigor is PvP focused, and there's only one correct build, which is Violent. I think the PvE contents I just laid out, which was Raid. When I say Raid, it's not R5 or anything like that. I'm talking about the elemental raids. But even for those or Necro, the correct build is Violent, right? We're solely going to be talking about Violent build here, and because again, the more turns he takes, the more utility he brings into your team. So now we know that Vigor is most efficient with the Violent build and can provide a lot of buffs, debuffs, and damage. So what stats should people focus on? I think this is where people have a hard time deciding on how they should rune their Vigor with the runes they currently have, because everybody doesn't have godlike runes and will need to make a sacrifice on certain stats to gain the other. So here I will lay out what the priorities should be on your Vigor, and this is solely my opinion. There might be different people out there, different content creators, different players that have a different opinion, and I totally respect that. But this is solely my personal opinion, okay? Before we go into anything else, you guys should always focus on stats rather than sets. So the subset, you guys don't have to go with will if you cannot get the stats that you want. So always bear that in mind. However, if you can get it on will by sacrificing a little HP like 1,000, 2,000, a little less defense like 100, a little less accuracy like 10% accuracy, and maybe a little less speed, which is between 5 to 7 speed, then yes, put it on will, because that will brings in that extra safety net for your team. But nonetheless, stats are what you should focus on. But now I'm going to talk about which stats you should prioritize. And again, this is only my opinion. So 1, definitely HP. So some people might disagree and say that speed is the most important stat, and yes, I respect their opinion and will say that speed is definitely one of the most important stats. However, I believe a unit like Vigor that brings in so much utility needs to survive. Yes, some people say no, a unit like Vigor that brings in so much utility, like a speed buff and a crit resist buff, should go first, and again, I respect that. But if you're sacrificing too much HP just for the speed, I don't think that's the right way to go. I think that HP has a higher priority than speed. So also Vigor skill 1 and skill 3 both scale off of HP, so more HP means more damage. So apart from the utility, he also does more HP. He also does more damage if he has more HP. I want to say that HP should at least be plus 20k. I'm just gonna say like a reference point. I'm not gonna say it should be at least this much because I'm not referencing a certain tier like G1, G3, or C1 or F3, right? So I just want to say plus 20k. It could serve its purpose. Obviously, if you're in a higher rank, if you're in a higher tier, if your runes are better, you want to strive for higher HP. Second stat is speed. So this stat is a no-brainer. The game Summoner's War is really centered on this stat, where most fights are pretty much decided on whoever takes the first turn. So Vigor, obviously there is a benefit of him going first, because if he does use that skill 2, right? If he does use that skill 2, he brings in the heal, which is not really important when you're taking first turn, but he does also bring in that speed buff, plus the crit resist buff. The crit resist buff is huge, even if your other units don't go right after the Vigor. Because of that crit resist buff, it's really hard, or it's a safety net again, for your units to not get destroyed if the opponent takes a turn. So that, and the speed buff also gives it some safety net where it allows, maybe if, let's say your speed tuning is off by 1 or 2 speed, maybe the speed buff allows your units to go right after Vigor. Who knows? But so that's the benefit of that. It brings in a safety net for your team, so your team doesn't die. I'm not going to give a number here, but I really think this number, because I really think that this number depends on your rune quality and what team you're planning to use Vigor in. But simply said, make him the fastest as you can without sacrificing so much HP. I'm saying HP here because HP is the number 1 stat that I put, and speed is the second. So currently, you could sacrifice everything else for speed, but just don't sacrifice HP too much. Because if you get like 20 speed for losing 1000 or 2000 HP, then yes, you could make that sacrifice. But if you're sacrificing 5000 HP for like 10 speed, no, don't do that. Number 3, accuracy. Again, some people here might disagree, but really in most of my fights, so this is based on personal experience, with Vigor, landing his defense break was crucial for my wins. Even if he's not on a damage build, the defense break sets up my damage dealer, right? Because I know my Vigor, if you look at him right now, it's not on a damage build. So when I bring in Vigor, I bring in a separate damage dealer, so that damage dealer could follow up and from that defense break and kill off a unit. So like I said, the defense break sets up my damage dealer to finish a unit off. I want to say that Vigor should at least have 20 to 30% in accuracy to function well, knowing that it has a 3 chance, right, to land a debuff, because his skill 3 is a 3 hit multi-hit. Okay? So that's number 3. So I'm pretty sure the first 3 stats were pretty obvious. I mean, some people might have it in different order, but I think overall these 3 stats are the most important. From here, it gets kind of tricky. It really depends on your build. Do you want your Vigor to do damage, or are you solely using the Vigor as utility? So you want the tankiness, you want the speed, you want him to survive, you want him to land a defense break, so on and so forth. So from this point on, it totally makes sense if you disagree, because people have their own opinions building a unit. But nonetheless, here is my number 4, okay? And my priority, just to let you know, is the utility build, because it's a lot easier to rune than a damage build. Number 4 is defense. Again, this stat is for tankiness. It goes well with HP, so the more you give him, the tankier he is, and the longer he survives, right? Again, this guy needs to survive to bring in all that utility. To be honest, Vigor's base defense isn't that great. So we look at it right now, it's at 538, which is not that high. So you don't want to be really focusing defense, but just try to get as much as you can from substats, and that should be good enough. I want to say at least plus 400 is good. It's a good reference point, but again, this depends on where you're standing, what your rune qualities are. So everybody's gonna have a different reference point. I see a lot of people that has only like plus 300, and that's totally fine. If you have a lot of HP, it still could survive. You should really never sacrifice too much HP, accuracy, or speed for defense. So again, the first few stats I talked that was right before this that are high priorities, do not sacrifice it for defense. You could sacrifice the stats that are in lower priority for the higher stats, but you can't do the other way around. Don't do that. Number five is crit rate. Crit rate is the only one that's pretty high in my list. I mean, there's only 8 stats, so I guess it's not really high in the list, but it's there because the HP scaling damage also applies to crit rate, right? Crit rate is generally a good stat on Vigor because you naturally build Vigor on a lot of HP, and again, his skill damage scales off of HP. So with a good amount of crit rate, he can really output a lot of damage without the extra crit damage. I want to say a minimum of 60 is enough. I see sometimes 50, but I think that's the bare minimum I would go for if you are sacrificing other stats for crit rate. If it's gonna be lower than that, I'll just say, okay, just forget about crit rate and just focus on the other stats, okay? You don't really have to have him on a damage build. And without crit rate, even with the 20% crit rate, my Vigor still sometimes crits multiple times using his skills, and he outputs a lot of damage seeing at how much HP he has right now. Number 6 is attack. So some people don't know, but Vigor's damage also scales off of attack. I think every damage dealer damage scales off of attack at least a little bit. So it is actually nice for him to have a good amount of attack. If you look at mine, he has plus 530. I didn't focus on this substat. As you can see, it's 6th place from our priority list. So I didn't focus this, it just all came from my substats, okay? Just all came from the substats on my runes. So it was just there. But again, at this point, the stats you get shouldn't be sacrificing other high priority stats. So it's simply a plus if you can have a good amount of it from your other rune subset. No real number to reference here because this will be determined by your rune quality. Now number 7 is crit damage. Okay, crit damage here is number 7 because it only is effective if you have high crit rate, right? If you don't crit, you don't get that crit damage. Crit damage is good on Vigor, but it needs to be, again, coupled with a good amount of crit rate. I know some people give Vigor a lot of crit damage with low crit rate, like 40%. And I know this can be beneficial if your Vigor crits, but with 40%, the chance is pretty low. You know, once every 3 hits will be a guaranteed crit. Or I mean once every 2 hits maybe, who knows, but it's 40%, so safely say once every 3 hits. So it's really a wasted stat for the other 2 hits if you don't crit, and I don't think that's very efficient. If you can't give your Vigor enough crit rate, I advise you to not focus on crit damage, and that means don't put him on a crit damage slot 4 if you have only 40% crit rate, because I don't think that's correct. You should just put it on a HP slot 4, make it more tanky. Who knows, maybe you might have a better HP slot 4 that has a good amount of crit rate that will give him a total of 50% crit rate. He will definitely do more than giving him a crit damage slot 4 with only 40% crit rate and less HP. I guarantee you that. And number 8 is resistance, the last stat you should focus on. So one thing is that if you think you are purely going to focus, or if you think you're going to purely use Vigor as a utility unit and want him to survive more rather than doing damage, I will say that resistance can be a higher priority even on top of crit rate. So you're not thinking of crit rate, crit damage. The next stat you're focusing on is resistance, because you're like, okay, I just don't want my Vigor to die. I don't want my Vigor to get defense broken, so I don't want a lot of resistance on him. Then sure, then I think that this stat could be on top of crit rate. But I personally think it's the last stat that I'll focus on. If I can make my Vigor this tanky as you see here, with the crit rate and crit damage, I'll definitely focus that. But I don't know, it's kind of tempting. If I could have this much tankiness, speed, and have 100% or 70-80% resistance, that's also very tempting as well. So I guess this is personal opinion. If you want your Vigor to survive, resistance is good. If you don't, then crit rate is better. But I mean, thinking of the game Summoner's War, even if you have 100 resistance, you still could get defense broken. So maybe just going for that reliable damage build is better if you can make it. Then so yeah, I still think, in my opinion, I think resistance is last priority, and then the crit rate, crit damage, attack has a higher priority. Okay, so that's all for the stats. So you guys know the priority now. It's HP, speed, accuracy, defense, crit rate, attack, crit damage, and resistance. So that's my list. People could disagree. I think the first 3 stats people could like put it in their own order, but I'm pretty sure those 3 should be the highest priority stats. Okay, moving on, I'll talk about artifacts a little. I believe both artifacts should be HP main stats, or you can have a defense one like I do. But I personally think HP is better, and if I had HP, I'll put HP. The stats you should look for in the artifacts is definitely accuracy on skill 3 like I have right now, because even if you have 20 or 30% accuracy, the higher it is, the better, right? Can't emphasize more on how important it is to land that defense break. Again, if you're focusing on damage, go with the additional damage by a certain stat. Here I have HP. I think I have another one here by HP. Again, additional damage by attack or defense is good too, because it's not really that low. So he will benefit from it because he does have a multi-hit on skill 3. Or you could go the more tanky route by going with damage received from a certain element, or crit damage received minus what number, so that it could survive longer. The speed buff is also nice, like I have speed increasing effect, so that your Vigor can take more turns. So you can see damage. I have the damage received from water -3. I really wish it was wind, but I didn't get that. This is a lost stat. Let me try just converting this right now. Who knows? Maybe I might get something better. Boom, boom. Okay, yeah, dude, that's already better right there. So I'm gonna leave it like that. And here, do I have anything to say? No, this is all good. That's it for artifacts. There's not much to say, but I really think the most important thing is skill 3 accuracy. So you should definitely have one of that at least. There are a lot of good Vigors out there that is really tanky and does a lot of damage. My Vigor is not that, because as you can see, it has no crit rate, right? Or crit damage. That's not what I focused on. But he still does a good damage if he does crit 1 out of 5 times, because he has a lot of HP and attack, okay? Back to my point, if you really want to do a crit damage slot 4, I believe for it to be truly effective, the Vigor needs to be at least, the very least, plus 20k HP, and at least 60% crit rate. HP so it doesn't get sniped too quickly, and crit rate so it can actually do the crit damage. I could personally do that with my runes, but I think in G1, plus 20k is still fairly low. That's a low amount of HP. So I just gave up on that. It really depends on where you're standing. So you can see that I focused on HP, speed, because he has 40k. So he has plus 28k, so a total of 40k HP. And he has a lot of speed, right? I could make it faster, but I didn't want to. I had to sacrifice my HP and give it like some kind of different slot 4 or 6, and I didn't want to do that. So that's why this is all the speed he has. He has 20 to 30% accuracy, but with that artifact, he has 35% accuracy, which I think is pretty good. And he has plus 620 defense. By my list, after defense, it should be crit rate. But as you can see here, I couldn't get the crit rate. So everything below defense was ignored. I only focused on HP, accuracy, speed, defense. The attack seems a little high, but it's just something that came with the stats, the runes that I had, so I didn't focus on this. And again, the crit damage, resistance, they were just not looked at. I only focused on those 4 stats, and this is how my Vigor is currently looking. So how is my Vigor doing in my siege defense or in my PvP? I showed it multiple times in my PvP offense, and he's always doing his job, right? He lands his defense breaks, he brings in those speed buffs, the crit resist buff, the heals, the heal block, right? He does all of that. And in my siege defense, he's getting a lot of wins. Last siege season, his team got 21, 22 wins and only 9 losses, which is great. And then currently this siege, he won 6 times and only lost twice. So he's already doing so well. So you could see that it's performing well. And I really think that for those defenses, Vigor is the core unit, and if your Vigor is not properly ruined, it's not going to get that many wins. But my defense is getting wins, and I think it's because the Vigor is ruined properly. So that is it for today, guys. Hope this video helped you on which stats you guys probably will need to focus when you ruin the Vigor. I stated some numbers as I talked about the stats, but it really depends on your rune quality. Try to aim for it, but if you can't, I mean, do the best that you can to get close to it. And if you can reach it pretty easily, try to get more of the stats that you want. Yeah, anyways, that is it for today, guys. Hope you stayed to the end of the video, and I hope to see you guys next time. Bye.